Thank you very much, Maria. I'm about to share my screen. Okay, so I hope that everyone is seeing my screen. Okay. All right. So with regards to the payables management session that we're going to be looking at today, I would be first looking at the payables management in Dynamics GP, and I'm going to actually go to the vendor's card. So to get to the vendor's card, you go to the purchasing and you go to cards and then you go to vendors. Keep in mind, guys, we're only looking at payables management and not the whole purchase order processing module because that actually covers more areas than the topic that we are called to look at today. So in vendors, I'm not going to look at the process of setting up the vendor from scratch because for the most part, everyone kind of gets the idea of setting up a vendor's card, but we are going to take a look at an existing vendor and we're going to look at some of the things that may not be so obvious to the user. All right, so first things to note is the name. Now, this is your legal name for the vendor. All right, so it's very important to know this is the name that's going to be printed on 1099. And if this is a 1099 vendor, so name, keep that in mind, that goes on to your 1099 because this is the legal name. The other name is the check name that's going to be printed on the check. If you have a class ID, right, you are able to set up a vendor with a class ID, right? And you can set up the class ID and it will populate a lot of these options that we'll be covering next. We have the addresses. Just note that there are multiple addresses when you are setting up the vendor card. Right, so that way you can put multiple addresses for a particular vendor in the system. You can have a primary address. So this could be, for example, the vendor headquarters. You can have the primary address. So this is where that their headquarters may be located, but down here you may have a separate ID, and this would be your remit to address. So if they are currently in another country, but they have another location in another area, you can set up a remit to address, right? And this is going to be the second address for that vendor, right? Now, if there is another address that you want to send your 1099s to, you are also able to set up an address for that as well. And then we have the tax schedules and shipping method. So if you're trying to track taxes in the system, even for the most part, you are setting up the tax information for a particular vendor, right? And that may not always be the case if a vendor is not giving you the tax information. So you may want to calculate it within the system. You are able to use the tax schedule, right? You are going to have a tax schedule, and within the tax schedule, you have tax IDs, and it's going to allow you to set up the taxes in the system. So just know that you are possible to have the system calculate your tax schedules in the system for purchases, okay? All right, another thing that we can look at is the shipping method. These can really be anything. It's going to be on the purchasing side and it's used for informational purposes. What does matter is if it is pickup or delivery, right? So the pickup or delivery option in conjunction with the tax schedule would determine if your taxes are calculated based on your address or if the tax is calculated based on the vendor's address. So if you have an option in this shipping method option area and it's set for pickup, what is going to mean, and it's you have it attached to this vendor currently, and you are processing a receipt from this vendor and you want to calculate based on the pickup address, right? Which is their address. Now, if you wanted to calculate based on the address that you're delivering to, right? So for example, it would be your address, then you would use the delivery option, right? So just keep that in mind. Okay. So let's go into the options again. A lot of these options will be defaulted from your class setup. Just keep that in mind. You have payment terms, whatever agreements that you have with your vendor, you can populate them in here, right? You have payment priority. This is probably one of the most unused feature in GP, right? At least on the payable side. So if you have certain vendors, for example, the ones that you want to pay every single day, you may put a payment priority of 1. And if you are in the process of creating check batches, you can select your payment priority 1 vendor and create your check payments just for those vendors in the system. All right. There's multiple ways that you could use this payment priority field, but just keep in mind that it's there. It can be used, and it can be used during the check printing process. Okay. Okay. We also have the tax ID. Now, if you have a 1099 vendor, it's important that you have the tax ID, right? Because that's going to also be printed on your 1099. And then we have the tax type, right? We also have the option to also add additional fields. So if you, for example, would like to add a field for region, you can add an additional field to these GP windows, and you can also add that information onto the field as well. Now the tax type, this is for 1099 purposes as well, right? We could also put in the vendor box site. Moving down here, you could have 1 payment per vendor, 1 payment per invoice. This is actually a feature that is available for GP 2018 version and above, right? So if for whatever reason you run a payment processing for this particular vendor and you want to receive 10 different checks instead of 1 check, right? You can select the option to print the check based on each individual invoice, right? If that doesn't make sense to you, then you can just leave it to the default, which would be 1 check per vendor. Yeah. So also you can set minimum payments. You can do set this, say for an amount of $5, right? You can be as granular as that, right? Credit limit, write out amount, same concept. You can either set it to unlimited or you can set an amount in the system. All right, so we can close out of this option window. Now in the accounts, these accounts are actually going to be your default accounts, right? So when you're processing a transaction, your default account would be my default purchasing account will go to this vendor, this account, sorry, default purchases account. You can also put default accounts for your accounts payables or finance charges, etc. And you can have that listed here. You can set up an expense account, and you can state what account that's going to go to. So just keep that in mind, that you do want to populate this information in, because it's going to kind of speed up your data entry process when you are processing your payable vouchers. And then last but not least, we have the email. These email options is going to allow you to enable the option, and until you enable this option, you would not be able to email this vendor within the system. So just remember that when you're setting up vendors within your system, you want to enable the feature for you to be able to email vendors within the system, right? You'll also ensure that there's a message ID that's allocated for the particular, whether it's a purchase order or a vendor remittance. And this is going to be an email message ID that's defaulted from the system. And then you can choose a particular format, and the format can be based on if it is you would like for them to receive, whether it's a PDF or Word documents or XPS, etc. You can set various format options in well. All right. So that is a vendor setup in. All right. All right, we're going to skip over the addresses and summaries and 1099 details. We could kind of touch on the customer vendor relationship in the system. So say, for example, you owe a customer money and you want to transfer their balance to the payables module, and you want to cut them a check. You could actually set them up here, right? And if you are interested in how this works, that can be a whole separate session where we show you how to get it set up and how to get this working. All right, so we have our setup complete. We have vendors in the system. So we're going to move into the transactions window. So within transactions, you are going to notice that we have a lot of options to choose from. The couple of lines that you would see located to the top, this is actually refers to purchasing order processing. So you see purchase requisitions, purchase order entry, etc. And again, today, we are not going to be touching on purchase order processing, more so payables management 101. All right, so all the purchasing, processing stuff is just a little bit more involved, right? So we are going to skip over the top section. What we actually going to be demonstrating today would be payables management. So we're going to go right into the transaction entry screen. So this is where you're actually going to process an invoice for your payables. So you get an invoice from your vendor and say, for example, invoice for all right. You can enter a batch ID, and if you are processing a whole lot of invoices, all right, you might want to just go ahead and create a batch ID. All right, it's going to help you greatly. So I can name this test 01. Right, and I'm going to tab across, and it's going to ask me if I want to add the batch. You are able to add a comment to the batch. I'm going to change my posting date that I have open in my test environment. Right, you could add a comment if you wish. You just remember your posting date is very, very important. This is the date that it will hit DGL. Just remember I am utilizing a test company. So for me, my posting date would be 2021. So if you are getting close to the end of the month and you are processing invoices from the prior month or the prior period, you just want to ensure that your posting date is correct and your checkbook ID is your default checkbook for when you start processing payments. Right, so I'm okay with this and I could save. Right. Now let's go into selecting our vendor. You can either use the lookup button or you can use the next records or previous records that are listed below. All right. Let's see. And let's select the first vendor in the system. All right, or you could also use Control L, and that's going to allow you to bring up the lookup option as well. That's just a shortcut key that is able to be used. You're going to enter your document number. This is your vendor's invoice number. So we're going to have it in the system. Right, the PO number, if it's available, you can enter that here. So PO 555, for example. Right, and you can enter your purchasing amount. So this is really what the expense for this invoice is going to be. So this is going to be the document amount that's currently sitting in front of you. So I'm going to say $500. And let's say that the vendor offered a discount. You are able to enter trade discount if you wish. That's going to allow you to receive that discount that was offered to you by the vendor, right? And it would be on the invoice. Now, if there's also freight, you can also enter that information as well. And any miscellaneous costs, you are able to enter that. And of course, if there's tax that you would like to capture that is not currently included on the invoice, you are able to also enter that here as well. All right. So skipping through here, as you can see, the 1099 amount has already populated, and that's because this vendor is currently set up as a 1099 vendor. All right, so as you're going through the system, if you have a 1099 vendor, you want to make sure that your 1099 amount field is currently populated. Just make sure that you have been setting up your vendors correctly. If for any reason you have been processing an invoice for 1099 vendor, but the invoice is not currently a 1099 transaction, you could actually change the 1099 amount and you can make it 0, or you can leave it as the 1099 amount, right? So you can actually do whatever you want, or you can even make it a partial 1099 payments as well. Right? Now, if you're going to do transactions on the fly, we have the cash option here. So let's say, for instance, you have a cash transaction with this vendor already, and you want to go in and say, this is a $500 invoice, and I've already paid this vendor. You can actually enter that information here. Right? And it's going to say which checkbook you basically want to take it out of. And you can enter that information here, and it's going to take it out from there. But we are not doing that today. We're just going to do a typical Payables transaction. All right. So we would subsequently run the Payables process for this voucher. All right, so same thing here. If it says you have already paid them with a check, right, you can enter the check amount. And also if it says you have paid them with a credit card, the same thing applies. You can enter that information in here as well. Okay. Credit cards would involve a little bit of setups. So just keep that in mind, but that's not going to be a topic of discussion for today's session. All right, just know that you are able to pay your invoices from GP with a credit card. And if you are also interested in learning more about credit cards, that can also be another session that we can have via this webinar. All right, so let's look at the distributions. So these distributions, notice I did not enter anything. So notice that these were defaulted, and that's because this was automatically populated, right, from my setup. Right, you can click these arrows here, and it's actually going to retract or show you more details on this window. Right. Right, and we'll also notice that we have the purchase amount comes from my purchase field, and my payable amount also comes from my payables field. So that's what these types here represent. So I'm going to select OK. And I'm pretty much done with this invoice. I'm going to click Save. All right. Okay. So once your transaction is saved, you are able to either add more payables transactions to the batch. We have our batch still here. All right, so you can go ahead and enter as much payables transactions as you want and add them to the batch. And then when you're ready to post your whole batch, you are able to then post it. All right, now the process to post this batch from the payables transaction entry window, you can click this blue arrow, and it will take you to the payables batch entry window screen. All right, so that opens up your batch window, and before you hit post, so let's just bring this up a little bit. Before you click post, you have to close out of the payables transaction entry window. Because if I was to post and I have this window open, the posting button is going to tell me that someone is still processing in this batch and it's not going to allow me to post, right? So currently I have it open, and I know that I'm currently done processing. So I am able to close out of this window. And once you close that transaction entry window, you are able to now click post. You can print your posts, posting reports to the screen, cancel some of these reports, print the general posting journal. Okay, so this report here, we have the payables transaction posting journal. Now, if you are going to print a report into the system, this is most likely going to be the report that you want to print, from the system. All right, so it gives you all the information located here. It also gives you your GL distributions. You can also reprint just about any report in the system out of GP at a later date. So you really don't necessarily have to be printing the reports when you post. But I know some persons would like to ensure that you want to print the report because you may want to file it, for example. So you would print it once you have posted the transaction, but it's not necessary. Like I said, you are able to reprint pretty much any of these reports at a later date from Dynamics GP, right? So I'm going to close this report. And this is also your general ledger journal. We're going to close this out as well. Okay, so that's basically the processing of an invoice for a vendor in the system. So what's next? Well, we're going to now pay the invoice. So the first thing that we're going to do once my screen has come back up here, we're going to build a payment batch. So let's go back into purchasing. And then we're going to go to build a payments batch. All right, so in the build payment batch window, you are able to create a batch ID. So I'm going to call it test track. All right, you're gonna click tab and you're gonna add this batch. Right, it's going to bring up the payables batch entry window. You, like I said, again, you are able to also add a comment. For this option, we are going to do checks today, but you do have the ability to also process EFT payments and also credit card payments as well. Right. So again, we're going to leave it as checks. We're going to select the checkbook ID if you don't have one already defaulted. And if you want to change your posting date or your check date for this batch, you are going to change that here. I'm going to set mine to 2021. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click save. All right. And you can go down here. You have within your versions of GP, you are able to utilize this field here that's called payment option ID. All right. So if it is you do have a payment option ID, it's just going to be a way for you to save your batch criteria. So you are able to create a payment batch ID, and it's going to allow you to save it as a restriction. All right, and it is going to be available here, and it's what is that just going to say is that for this particular batch, all my vendors within my payment option ID, right? It's saved to my option ID name, and that's basically it. So it's just going to allow you to have that save feature for your batches. All right. So like I said, the payment option ID is just a way to save your restrictions. So you don't have to just keep entering them over and over within the, right? So we're not going to use the payment option ID. We're just going to just build the batch from scratch, right? You have the option to select whether it's from the vendor ID, vendor name, class ID, your payment priority, vendor number, document number, etc. I'm going to leave it from vendor. You can use from the lookup field, or you can click Control L and you can say that you want to select from a particular vendor in the system, right? And you can either select for one vendor, you can select it from a range, and then you can go ahead and insert that vendor in the system. All right, so it's going to take that restriction and make it a part of your batch. If you want to add an additional criteria, you can as well, right? So if, for example, you want to say, give me everything that's due within the next week, so you can also set that due date option as well, and you can insert it into your restriction criteria as well. All right, so you can add as much restrictions as you like within the system. All right, and remember we discussed the payment priority a little bit earlier when we were setting up the vendor card. So if you have certain vendors that you always want to ensure that they are getting paid, you can select the payment priority if you have it set up, and you put in the payment priority of 1, for example, and that would be as one of your restrictions. And you click insert. So therefore, when this batch is building, it will only select those payment priority ones, right, in the system. So we also have a couple of options down here as well, to automatically apply existing unapplied, right? So you have your payments, your credit memos, your credit returns, right? Now, if you have an existing credit memo in the system and you just want to cut a payment for the net, you don't want to send the whole invoice. So you would leave these options enabled, so that you're able to create a check and we'll just cut the difference. All right. And then on the remittance, do you want to list all documents? How do you want to sort the documents? If you want to sort it by date, if you want to sort it by number as well, you have that option to choose. And that's purely on remittance. So that's basically what you need to know on the payables bills batch. So I'm going to remove this because we're not using payment priority. All right. And the next step for you would be to build a batch. Once you're okay with your criteria, then you click on the top left, you click build batch. All right. So let's just go through that step again. So just remember, you can go to build payment batch. All right. You enter batch, test, check 1, add the batch. You can select your payment option. You can choose your check date as well as your posting date. Click save. All right, you can set various criteria, or you can say all, and you can click build batch in the system. Yeah. So we just wanted to make note of the process again and how you currently build a batch. So once you have build a batch, you go to edit payment batch. All right. I'm going to change my apply date to 2021. That's the period that I currently have open in the test environment. And here is, you're going to see a breakdown of the vendors that you currently have to pay. These are the vendors that I have to pay. So you can see it currently selected some vendors here for me. We have this vendor for $600. You can also select additional vendors. This one would have been the vendor that we would have also created within the system. right? This vendor has an amount remaining of $600. You could also choose, to pay an additional vendor in the system as well, right? You can click through here, and if you want to say, okay, out of all these invoices, so for example, if the system shows a couple of invoices for me to pay, I can go in and say, okay, I don't want to pay this, or yes, it is, I want to pay this vendor the amount listed, right? So if it is you do want to pay a vendor within the system, you select the vendor, right? This one is invoice for goods and services. This would be the vendor that we created for document 555, the amount of $500, right? So we can say, yes, we want to pay this vendor. You can say, no, you don't want to pay this vendor. It's up to you, right? But we are going to currently pay this vendor in the system. Right. And once you're okay, you can see your batch total to the top based on your batch total amount. And then now that you have my final batch total here, you can now go in and print the checks. So the screen, let me see if I can maximize my screen a little bit. What else we have selected here? Okay. So we will remain with this vendor that we created, and we're going to currently pay this vendor. So the next selection would be to print the payment. So you click print payment. And here in the print payment windows, now if you want to take a look about with regards to what you're about to print, you can click on the edit list. And you can print that edit screen. So this is going to be a good report to also print, right? So it's going to also allow you to validate if there are any errors or such. Report that you may need to fix. Right? Once you're sure that what you have here is what you want to print checks for, you go ahead and click print. It's giving me about my date. So let's back. Just 2021. Okay. It's going to allow me to print. doesn't like. Okay, so it's saying that my document is currently fully applied. Let's see if it's going to allow me to print. Okay. So we're currently going to print our transaction. This one would be check format, stop check. We're going to also print that check to screen. Right. And this is going to print your check information. Right. Now you can choose various check formats. This is just a check format that I currently had set as default, but you can print check with stop on top, check with stop on bottom, depending on what format your company uses, right? And this will print onto your check stock and you'll be done. All right. So once you have printed, where does that take you now? It took me to this post payments window. So a couple of things just to note is that if it is you print out your check batch and you realize that your alignment may be off when you print your check, you can come to the process window and you may need to just reprint that check for whatever reason. You are able to choose the reprint payment option. Right, and you also have the option to void everything that you would have just did. Right, you may have completely just messed up the check and you say, you know what, I need to just void the payment and you'll start from scratch. But if you're completely done, you can go ahead and just click post payment, hit process. Right, and you have completed your payment process in Dynamic HTTP. All right, I'm just canceling out the reports. So yeah, and you're done. You're done with the payables process, right? Now, we'll just look at manual payments for a short sec. If you have ever handled a payment outside of GP, right? And you just need to recognize that payment within the system, you can come here to the manual payment entry window. And that's going to allow you to say, okay, I'm going to select the vendor. I handed that vendor cash, and it equates to say $200 in cash. You can enter that here. And then you could then click through here and say apply. And then you can apply that to certain invoices in the system. Yeah. So this is another feature that you can use within GP. So if I was to select the vendor and I say cash and I said $200 and apply, right? It's going to allow me to apply that payment to an invoice, an open invoice in the system. And if you had multiple invoices, you could say, okay, so I'm going to select the invoices that is applicable. And then that's it. So the manual process payment is recognizing payments that happen outside of GP, and you can use that functionality. All right, I'm going to delete this. All right. Now, had you run through an EFT process instead of a check process, after you post the batch, you can actually go to the generate EFT file and generate the file that you would have sent to the bank to process those EFT payments, right? So just keep that in mind. We didn't do EFTs, but we did check payment today. You also have the apply payment payables document feature. So let's say that you are currently at month end and you want to make sure that you're cleaning up your open EP. Well, you're going to go to the apply payments document window, right? So one of your process would be to just clean up that open AP. All right, so you'll select your vendor. All right, and then if there's any outstanding documents, you select the outstanding payments or outstanding credit memo. All right, you can see that there's an unapplied amount of $80. And let's apply this to this payment to any outstanding invoices, and you can utilize it that way. All right, so you can select, you want to apply it to here, so that gets that way there's basically less EP on the books, and that way your invoice has now been applied. And if you applied it here, the date, so you can apply it, and now you have less $20, so you have $60 remaining, right, to be used for payment of invoices. Now you can either void a payment or an invoice using the void historical and void open transactions. Right, very important is that there are different statuses for documents within the system. So just keep that in mind. So you have the work status. Work is anything that's currently unposted in the payables module. Open is anything that is posted but not fully applied in the payables module. And then you have history. History documents, that is anything that has been posted and it has also been fully applied in the system. So if you have an invoice that you have posted and you have paid it with a check, then both the invoice as well as the check is going to be in the historical status in the payables module. All right, so therefore you would go to your void historical transaction window and you are able to void that historical transaction. And that's where you will void your payment, void your voucher, etc. All right, so guys, I think that is what we're going to be covering in today's webinar. I really hope that this has been a very informative session to you guys. And I would like to thank you all for your time today. Thank you.